Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US elections special, it doesn't really confine itself to the US alone. It is a video that is going to be concerned with the lot of the world, the geopolitical situation, landscape across the globe, because this has far-reaching consequences. So I have done an awful lot of videos on the US election. I've spent an awful lot of time saying an awful lot of words, and it turns out that I was pretty wrong in my conclusions. And so this video is, I was wondering whether to do this video at all as a live stream, because I get quite emotional anyway, because my multiple sclerosis makes me much more emotional than I used to be. And I am finding this quite emotional, and it is affecting, I guess, my mental health, if you want to put it like that, because politics is a subset of morality. And so what has happened in the US over the last 24 hours has huge moral dimensions in the decision itself of all these people and why they were making that decision, and then how that affects the rest of the world. There are all sorts of moral, political implications. And I think it's really disastrous to a huge degree. Now, I know there'll be a bunch of you out there, whether genuine or Russian trolls, sitting out there going, ha, 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 I told you so. Or simply in good faith, I told you so. I told you this was happening. You didn't listen to me. Or just trolling about because you're paid to do so. Okay, whatever. Yeah. So I got this wrong, but I think half of the American population got this wrong. So, and that is a pretty patronizing thing to say, but actually I think I've got good justification for saying so. So I think, you know, because at the end of the day, 50% of the population, give or take, got it wrong if you're one side or the other. I'm the other side, so I'm going to say 50% of the population got it wrong. So this video is about, okay, how did I get it wrong? What did I get wrong? How did I get it wrong? And then what did they get wrong? And how do we explain this? And what do we think going forward? So I gave you all. So basically, I was umming and ahhing as to whether to do a live or to do a pre-record. And in fact, I've only just got out of bed. I've had a couple of hours sleep, and I just spent the entire morning morose in bed, looking at my phone and watching CNN on TV, and just trying to get my head around everything that's happened. And it is pretty devastating for me, because obviously I had my hopes and aspirations for what would happen, especially concerning Ukraine, right? I think Ukraine's future hangs in a balance, and this has dented its chances of surviving in a way that it would like to. This is not a good outcome for the world at large, and that includes Europe in general, by the way. There are lots. This is a reward for autocratic leaders, both on the outside, looking in, going, that's the kind of leader we want, and I'm rewarded in getting that leader because it gives me an extra team member to hang around. But it rewards autocracy within the US because of some of the things that are clearly going to happen if Trump maintains his promises. Now, I listened. In fact, I'll read you my post on Facebook just as a kind of introduction, even though I've given you some preamble into what I'm thinking at the moment. But it was just incredible when Donald Trump came up and spoke in his acceptance speech. It was terrible. It was objectively terrible. It was a terrible speech. Like, it was just like his rallies, like meandering and low energy. And then actually got Dana White on, the fighting guy, and he was kind of upbeat. I mean, I hated everything he said, but he was like, that was a kind of Trump that you should have had. Instead, we had this rambling mess, and I just thought, that's what people have voted for. We saw that in the rallies, and I gave you all the warnings, and that's what you voted for, or at least we'll come on to actually what people did vote for. And so I just wrote this. Oh dear, I'm listening to his speech. What the hell is he talking about? What have you done, America? Of course, he's talking about Elon Musk. He's partly responsible for this shit show. And Joe Rogan got a mention. A sexual abuser and convicted felon has won bigly, with pretty inexcusable behaviours becoming normalised and accepted. My predictions were wrong. The polls were wrong for a record-breaking third time in a row. Arguable, actually. I might correct that, because actually they were pretty much within the margin of error. Turnout wasn't there for the Democrats and certainly was for the Republicans. This was a spanking. Battleground states were handily won by Trump in what can only be described as a huge upset that spread right across the nation. What happened? This was not because America was not ready for a female president and a woman of color, although you can be forgiven for thinking so. This was not because of the Democrats doing X or not doing Y. Harris took over with only months to go and, controversial opinion here, did a good job. Now, that sounds odd for me to say she did a good job but lost. Her campaign was a gaffe-free and scandal-free. And as Bakari Sellers stated on CNN, she built the plane while she was flying it. But the mechanisms of messaging were against her. So this is broadly my thesis. So the Democrats massively outraised and outspent the Republicans. The ground game was vastly superior than the Republican ground game, which was barely existent. All of this barely touched the sides. Kamala Harris is the only candidate in history who has worked in all three branches of the government, and as such is technically the most qualified candidate for the role. But this is more about why people voted against decent rational judgment and evidence. What brings about such a phenomenon where one side gives a cogent 80-odd page book outlining the economic agenda and the other person blathers on about tariffs, where the economy is seen as one of the main driving factors, and the electorate votes for tariffs? Here's an example and an analogy, and this is a personal one for me, and it's an experience I had the other day that I think explains kind of what happens. One of my 14-year-old twins was spouting off the other day about how wonderful it was that Andrew Tate was innocent of that which he's been accused. The grievance narrative stuff that my boy was expressing had nothing to do with reality, and certainly not his reality. So how the hell has he ended up being in a position whereby he is saying the things and believing the things that he is? He has been victim to information that has been generated and fed to him by an information space in which he sits. Half of America lives on this landscape. We all live on this landscape, right? So we all live on in our own information spaces, and we have a tendency to get sucked in. You guys have been listening to me, and you will have been sucked into what I was saying, thinking actually the Democrats got a good chance, Kamala Harris got a good chance, we've got this in the bag, no problem. And it didn't happen. So we're all victim to our own information bubbles. But I think this aligns with everything I've been telling you for 2.5 years in terms of an epistemic crisis. Epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth in philosophy. So this is an information problem. There is simply no way that you can hold that the economy is one of your main reasons for voting, and think that the administration that has given the population the best comparable economy in the world, and think that Trump's suite of economic proposals are going to make things better. They won't. The reasons that Trump won were as follows, but not remotely exclusively. 1, Fox News with its huge reach and the reality of being a propaganda arm for Trump. 2, Elon Musk and Twitter or X. 3, Joe Rogan. 4, Tucker Carlson and other information peddlers. 5, other largely online information spaces. 6, disinformation campaigns such as Russia and China, but also internal. 7, any racism and sexism that exists in the country that played a part is largely a result of or amplified by all of those other things that I've just said. His decision not to have a second debate, by the way, was also exactly correct. Well played, Trump there. Garbage in, though, garbage out. If we are fed disinformation on a consistent basis, then we can expect to make poor decisions as a result. And this is an example of disinformation acting on a huge number of people. As a result of this complete disaster of a political outcome, Trump has promised to fulfill his agenda, and that includes the following. 1, introducing tariffs across the board on everything coming into the country to the tune of 100, 200, 400, 500, 2,000%. Take your pick, as he mentioned all of them and said he didn't really care what. It's inflationary. You can expect trade wars with China and the EU. 2, deporting 13 million migrants who have been in the country anywhere up to 20 years, which means either separating them from their American citizen children or deporting citizen children with them. It's inflationary again. 3, seeking vengeance on his enemies and closing down any investigations into them. Together with the Supreme Court immunity he's already gained, this will inoculate him from being held accountable. 4, he has hinted at revoking the licenses of critical news organizations. 5, he's going to put RFK Jr. in charge of health, a man who is a vaccine denialist and a conspiracy theorist on all things health. Trump said he would let him go wild. 6, put Elon Musk in charge of government efficiency that would essentially be a green light to deunionize and to halt any investigations ongoing at the moment, of which there are many, into Musk. 7, stop support for Ukraine and increase support for Israel. 8, defund the Department of Education. 9, undo the Chips and Science Act. 10, undo the Affordable Care Act. 11, walking away from international alliances and obligations. 12, watch out for Project 2025, which he denied, but is clearly going to be the platform for his administration. 13, Supreme Court justices. Is likely he will get to pick another 2 of these and he will go young. This will skew the lawgivers of the land even more conservative for even longer. 14, releasing the January the 6th insurrectionists, etc., etc. So not only did Donald Trump lie voluminously through his previous administration, but he lied right the way through the campaign, and very obviously so. This election has been an over-rewarding of people who peddle disinformation. This is my core thesis, is that we are rewarding lying. We are rewarding telling mistruths and disinforming people. My heart breaks for the people of Ukraine and Palestine. Trump has no interest in either. We are at a time in world history where dictators and autocrats are gaining in power and reach, and these leaders are the people whom Trump respects most. Today, I'm deeply depressed and anxious about the state of the world, and this electoral outcome will demonstrably make matters worse. This is really, really bad day for the environment, global security, economic stability, reproductive rights, the rule of law, and more. In 2020, he had the lowest of low job approval ratings. Now, in 2024, his approval rating has retrospectively risen to 50%. This is a perception thing, and perceptions are being manipulated by information spaces. He is remembered better than he was perceived at the time. He's approved more as an outsider than an actor within. Sometimes the universe is unfair. To me, this is one of those times. This sucks, like a lot. Trump rode on the coattails of Obama's excellent economy in 2016, and they will likely do the same again in 2024 with Biden's. So that's kind of a rough synopsis of my thoughts, that actually how we've got here is that there is a great deal of lack of information. There's a problem with disinformation, misinformation, so purposeful, accidental, and also lack of information. Those 3 aspects have allowed an electorate to, as it happens actually in all elections, but I think now we're at a time where the internet is so prevalent that the modes of disinforming people and the ability to live in bubbles of either lacking information or having the wrong information allows us to get to the ballot box and have a completely skewed worldview, like my son has about Andrew Tate. He just has a complete skewed idea of who Andrew Tate is based on a TikTok algorithm that feeds him stuff that generates opinions in him about things that he knows nothing. Now, you multiply that across 350 million people or the entire world. We are living in a time where information is like gold dust. Truth and accuracy is like gold dust. And I know I've got things wrong, but we'll come on to why in a second. But in terms of information, you and I, we are freaking high information voters. Now, you may look at a political scientist and go, I don't know nearly as much as them. You guys have been with me for a couple of years now, and we have been learning about what's going on in Ukraine. You can put a pin on a map and tell me where Hungary is. You know who Viktor Orban is. And by that, I mean not just his position, but his character and what he's been up to. You know the importance of piling support into Ukraine and to giving appropriations bills to Ukraine so that it funds economic stimulus in your own country. You understand what BRICS is: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You understand the Eurasian and the Caucasus as areas, Eurasia as areas. You understand how the EU functions to support Ukraine. You understand X and Y. You guys are high information voters. A vast majority of people in the American electorate and any electorate, in the British electorate, in the French electorate, are low information voters. When I was hearing anecdotes about people door knocking, when they said, some Pod Save America hosts were saying, yeah, I was door knocking, and someone said, yeah, I'm going to go out to vote. I'm probably going to vote next week. It's like, the election's tomorrow, mate. You don't even know your general election's tomorrow. I remember being in a staff room at an educational establishment I was working at with a degree holding teacher. And this was probably 2009, during the Cameron administration of the Tory party. She was like, oh, I don't know what political party's in charge of the country. I don't even know who our prime minister is. He had a degree holding, like a college educated person, a teacher, not knowing who the prime minister and the ruling party of the country was. She won't be the only one. So my issue with America is low information. Well, any country, not America. This isn't picking on America. This is just the electorates in general around our countries are easy to manipulate because of the way that the internet is set up and algorithms and social media. Go and watch A Social Dilemma on Netflix as a documentary to understand. It's really interesting at the end of that documentary, where all the people contributing to it, who are people that wrote the algorithms for the social media companies, like, so how do you feel with social media with your children? Oh, we don't let our children on it. Oh, right. So you're the people that's designed Facebook and Twitter, and you don't let your children on social media? No, yeah, it's too dangerous, horrible. Yeah, I get that. It's dangerous. We live in a time where we are so easy to manipulate. Now, we are high information voters, and we have some guardrails for our own personal lives that mean we have enough knowledge to be able to be fairly sturdy in our opinions. And we are slightly harder to manipulate. But I got the election called wrong. There was a bit of hopium in there, but we are still easy to manipulate. Think of the low information voters out there who don't give a monkey's ass about the election. How easy are they to manipulate? I think it's it's a real issue. So that's a big problem I have, that I think that many people in the American electorate were not knowledgeable enough about stuff. And even if they did have so-called knowledge about things, like, oh, I know Trump's going to be big on tariffs, but that knowledge was poor. It's like, tariffs are going to be good. It's, what do you mean? It's, don't even know that it's a sales tax. Don't even know how tariffs work. Yeah, screw China. Let's put tariffs on everything. So you're going to start a trade war with the EU, start a trade war with China. By putting tariffs on this, that is effectively a sales tax. And it is going to be hugely inflationary. So if you're someone who is genuinely worried about the cost of things at the moment, you are voting someone in who is going to deport 13 million workers, thus put a strain on the labor force, and that is inflationary. And you're going to you voted someone in that's going to put tariffs across the board, which is inflationary. And then you've voted someone in that's going to do tax cuts for the rich, extend those and make them worse and add to the deficit. Like, how, like, so when I say that they got it wrong, like, I've got rational justification that they've made the wrong decision. Like, if you sat down and said to the average voter, right, would you like, whoever you vote in, would you like that new administration to add this much money to your monthly bills for the next 4 years? Do you understand that this is what the effect tariffs have on your purse? on your bank account? Do you understand that these tax cuts will have this effect? Do you understand that the education system is going to be defunded, as according to Trump? So he said in his speech he's going to come through on all his promises, and I read out some of the promises to you. Do you understand this is what is going to happen? And if you do now understand properly what's going to happen, would you still vote for this guy? Or are you voting for him because he's an outsider? He's an anti-establishment. I think there's this anti-establishment movement, and lots of people have been talking about this. This has been happening across Europe. This is a global phenomenon in democracies where we are fed up with the political class and the elites because we see them as really like corrupt and horrible. Actually, they're just politicians trying to do a fairly stable job. And by getting in an outsider, an iconoclastic person who doesn't fit into the kind of political elites framework, you think that that's going to be a better thing. And actually, this is someone who's going to take a sledgehammer to everything, all of the framework that's been put in place gradually over time, take a sledgehammer to that, and also make himself immune to being held accountable to his actions by purging out the civil service, having presidential immunity, putting in probably two more Supreme Court justices, etc., etc. And you're like, suddenly 4 years later, you've got a more autocratic administration, a more autocratic leader. And then you might hope, well, there are checks and balances in place. Yeah, but if he gets a trifecta, if the Senate's clearly now going to be Republican, he's got the public vote as well, and he's got looking. I don't know about the House yet, but it's likely on for the House as well. There is no way of stopping him doing that unless he's got his own party that he has an iron grip over, holding him to account or stopping him and providing those guardrails. So I think it's a deeply worrying situation that I think, had you sat all of those millions of people down and explained to them what each party and each nominee was representing and putting forward as their agenda, and properly explained the ramifications of each of these things that they are touting, I think the vote would have been different. And I think there's a lot to be said about a lack of information in political in electorates in general, actually. And it's funny. I used to speak to my mate about this years back, and he was of the opinion, he's like, well, back in the Greek days, you know, the Athens and the start of democracy, actually not everyone could vote, and you had to be a certain kind of class of people, and these people can vote and these people can vote. And he's like, isn't it weird that in this society, like, you have to pass a test to be able to drive a car so that you are a safe driver and you don't harm other people on the road? You have to learn the theory, and then you have to do driving lessons. And then there's regulation in place that once you have achieved the requisite skill level and knowledge level, you can go and drive. But anyone can vote, and that voting can cause immense damage to other people, not only in your country, but abroad. Now, this is a dangerous route to go down. This is a thought experiment I'm having with you. I'm not saying we should restrict people's ability to vote. However, isn't it interesting that we can vote with no regulation in place as to what our levels of knowledge should be about that which we are voting? My way around that would be to make civics classes mandatory and to a quite high level, and maybe have, you know, like in Australia, in enforced first voting. Once you pass the voting age, you have to vote. You have to vote for the first time, you get fined. And that starts getting you interacting with the political world and starting to get knowledgeable about it. It's really interesting. So I kept talking about that Trump had this ceiling and he wasn't going to break through it. And then he promptly just smashed through the ceiling. And part of what he got the majority of first-time voters. Freaking hell, the Democrats should have that sewn up. He got young people at a much greater number. He just, all of these demographic groups that you think, well, that's safeguarded for the Democrats. No, he was having success with them. And I think there's a lot to be said about whether these people had the requisite knowledge to be voting, the knowledge about who people still. So a lot of young voters didn't have a clue that he had said things about grabbing pussy from the Hollywood Access tapes, because of course they were like 12 at the time or whatever. And it wasn't on their radar. Then you're now at voting age, and unless you come across that on your Twitter algorithm, you might not know about that, or TikTok or whatever. Didn't know about this, didn't know about that. And I just kept hearing these anecdotes of people just not having, or listening to people try and explain why they are voting for Donald Trump and thinking, well, that's wrong and that's wrong. And so it frustrates me that there is this lack of knowledge, and it is very difficult to know exactly what to do about that, because then you might say, well, that knowledge is biased. No, that's not really knowledge, that's propaganda from the other side. But I think I can be pretty safe in saying, well, look, if we explained how tariffs work, that's at least something. I mean, because I don't even think Donald Trump understands how frickin' tariffs work. He's tried to explain them. He's tried to explain that they're not sales tax, that they are a tax on the other country. And he just clearly, by his own words, doesn't understand them. And that's who you voted for. He doesn't understand macroeconomics. He's put up in front of the Chicago Club of New York and the Chicago Club of, the Economic Club of New York and the Economic Club of Chicago. And he was asked very pertinent questions at a granular level of detail, required a granular level of detail for the response, and he fluffed it. He couldn't answer them. It was useless. But no one's watching that. So, when Fox News has that iron grip on the American populace, whereby it's the biggest information source, news information source, and it delivers everything about Trump through a propagandistic lens, then we've got a problem. Now, you can argue that CNN's like that MSNBC's like that, etc., but they're not as big. It's just a scale issue here. And when you've got Joe Rogan interviewing, JD Vance, and I would argue that she should have gone on Joe Rogan for sure, Kamala Harris, but you had Joe Rogan, JD Vance, and Elon Musk, 1, 2, 3 on Joe Rogan. He doesn't push back on any of their claims. He's the biggest podcast in the world. And Donald Trump gets 3 hours of splurging his nonsense unchallenged, effectively. He kind of half challenged a couple of bits, Joe Rogan, but essentially it was like, here's some free propaganda to however many million people watch Joe Rogan. And that's what I talk about. That's what I'm talking about in terms of information spaces. So if the Democrats want to win next time round, they've got to be able to, and this is a challenge, how do you wrest back information spaces? How do you effectively produce democratic propaganda to that kind of level without it seeming like propaganda? Because that's what Joe Rogan, we know that Trump sees Fox News as propaganda, and he's rails against them when he's like, they shouldn't have adverts against me on propaganda. That should be not allowed to happen. He's an autocrat wannabe for sure. So anyway, that's that. We're going to go to listen to a little bit of Rory Stewart on the rest of is politics US. Well, they went over to the US, and this is what he has to say.
In the country they have a stake in.
I must make sure I've got that on normal speed. Yes.
I just wanted, though, to follow up on this interesting point Alice has raised. The extent to which Gaza has become very important to these elections. Now, Trump's victory has been very, very considerable, but he's been helped by the fact that there's been some interesting articles in the New York Times about 440,000 Jewish voters in Pennsylvania who felt Trump was much, much stronger on Israel. And paradoxically, Kamala Harris was hit in Dearborn, Michigan from the other side, where Jill Stein seems to have taken about 22% of the vote, in Michigan, one of the key swing states, because Arab Americans were very uncomfortable with Kamala Harris's position on Gaza. So I think this is something that we will see playing across. One more final thing. This is a body blow to the way the world will view America. Do not underestimate this. I mean, people like me who were betting hard on Kamala Harris are betting on our sense of hope for America. Essentially, I'm saying I believe in this country. They are not going to repeat the mistake they made in 2016. This man is a clear monster, and in the end, the good sense of the American people will prevail. the decision of America to vote again for Donald Trump just feeds into the narrative of so many people around the world that this country is in trouble.
Just a couple of...
I agree on that. Just you've got 8 years of data after that first election, and we're here now, so tells you something about the country.
Marine, I don't want to upset you even more, but Trump also said that Robert F. Kennedy is going to help make America healthy again. So I don't know what that means.
Does it mean that the fluoride is coming out of the water? Because that was one of the one of the late unveiled policies this last week.
You've always thought that these kind of third candidates have been part of the kind of MAGA Steve Bannon plot, particularly RFK.
But I didn't think. I know.
Right.
That was part of it. I saw.
So he had a, not insignificant support. He then came out for Trump. I mean, there's no single thing that won the election for Trump, but that must have helped.
No question. No question. And the Republicans do it better than the Democrats. Like, the Democrats would never put up an alt-right candidate to steal votes away from Trump, right? Look at what Nader did to Al Gore, as we've talked about. Jill Stein did a number on.
This is really interesting that actually, so it's the idea that if the Democrats want to win next time, then they've got to play dirty. That actually, they not dirty, but kind of strong, like robust ways of doing things, like be cynical, be hardcore. Like they talk about it a little bit after this, where they said in the first couple of years they should have put things in place that meant there couldn't be any of this backsliding. That Democrats should have been much harder over time on the Supreme Court, and Obama 8 months not being allowed to put his guy in, and the Democrats need to play as hard as the Republicans do. The Republicans are good at playing hard, and the Democrats aren't.
Hillary Clinton, Jill Stein, it looks like she did a number on Vice President Harris. They're running the same playbook. The other thing, you guys probably remember Cambridge Analytica.
Certainly do.
Okay, and so Cambridge Analytica, someone's going to study what Musk did, because they didn't have Cambridge Analytica in 2020. They lost the election to Biden. But they did have Elon Musk, and they did have access to the $44 billion musical instrument known as X, where they were playing notes out into the marketplace. And it worked for them.
I don't know.
Absolutely there. The use of Elon Musk cannot be understated.
There's a pun in here, but Emmanuel Macron.
And so I thought that was really interesting. We're going to go and look at a couple of things they say in this that I think are worth dwelling on, just because I think it helps us to understand. So 236.30. So forgive me for riding on these guys' coattails.
Another thing is that a lot of the people voting for him and Trump's inner circle don't really like the idea of democracy. They believe in the idea of strong people. They sort of look at Putin and China and they think these guys get stuff done.
Yeah.
Right? They're respected around the world. They build stuff. And of course, that's how Orban thinks about things. And that is how Kikel in Austria thinks about things. That's how the AfD thinks about things. Pretty much how Le Pen thinks about things. So there is a sense now, I think, that we may see in the next few months a coalescing of all these different characters from Europe as well, coming around the idea that basically liberal democracy is a bit wet, it's a bit ineffective, a bit useless. And that was, to some extent, the conclusions of the 20s and 30s for some of those parties.
Yeah,
we've got an interview coming up in the next few weeks, I think, with David Petraeus, former head of the CIA, 5-star general, all that stuff. And it was fascinating, this, Anthony, and he's not the only one that we've talked to in senior levels of the American administration, former administration, establishment, what have you, who he kept talking about Viktor Orban. He kept sort of saying, that Orban is a very big figure for the American right. And this is a tiny country, Hungary. And yet he's become this, and that's because there's this kind of network.
So you have to understand the new American.
So before Garen Ritchie goes on, I mean, this to me is really worrying, where you hold up. So on the one hand, America has this tradition whereby they always talk Americans talk in terms of, it as a country, the US being this beacon of democracy. And yet on the other hand, they are pulling over Viktor Orban, and Trump is talking about Viktor Orban in these wonderful ways, in wonderful manners, and then he's invited over, and the CPAC and the conference, conservative conference, has Viktor Orban as his star man, and it goes to Budapest, and you're thinking, what's going on here? Like, if I sat down and spoke to an average voter and just laid out exactly what Viktor Orban's like, would you like to live in a place where your judiciary was screwed over by one person, where one person got to strip back the free press, holding them to account? Like, when they look at someone like that and you explain that movement towards autocracy in Hungary, they go, yeah, that's horrible. But then when you say, now look at what's going on with what Trump wants to do in the US, then it's fine, because it's Trump represents me, and that's my kind of morality, and so I don't want to be held accountable by a judiciary and by the free press. And if Trump's up there slagging off the free press, that's because they're criticizing Trump, and Trump is an extension of me, therefore they're criticizing me, and therefore I'm fine with shutting up the free press. And so there's this double standards that exist that I find deeply, deeply problematic.
Right. And again, I would ask people to Google Curtis Yarvin. He is a professor that believes in a monarchy for the United States. And he believes...
Dom and I believe in that too, obviously.
Okay. So if you believe in that, I don't believe in that, but if these
I'm
people
with you,
do,
Mooch.
and I'm just letting you know that Yarvin, his acolytes include Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, and they believe that the democracy in the United States is obsolete, it no longer works, and they would like a group of elites. And I'll remind you guys, because you're Brits, of the movie Remains of the Day. You remember Anthony Hopkins in Remains of the Day?
Yeah.
Where the aristocrat is looking at the butler and saying, so what do you think of the monetary policy? I don't know, sir. Well, what do you think about our geopolitical position? I don't know, sir. And then he scoffs, and he looks at his fellow elites, and he says, these people don't know anything. Why the hell are we giving them a chance to vote? And then the point of the movie, the elites stupidly are now welcoming the Nazis into this guy's manor house, because elites sometimes can't make the judgment. And what Lincoln said about America, there's wisdom in crowds. There's wisdom in people seeing things. Okay, this movement cannot be ignored.
No.
Somebody has to say to themselves on the Democratic side, hey, we're missing something here. If he directly threatens the democracy and he kills the democracy, we're accomplices to it because we didn't take it seriously enough. And if he doesn't, and I hope and pray that he doesn't, how the hell are we going to win back the moderation in America? And how are we going to strengthen the institutions that have made America prosperous, free, and safe?
Rory knows about this.
This is really, really important, and we're going to go on to think about this in terms of, well, what happens next when if you've lost the trifecta, then how can you start challenging this? So if you've got a MAGA Trumpian trifecta that then moves forward and does some of these things to remove the guardrails and the checks and balances, then how can you are relying on a Congress who is basically in the pocket of the president to hold that president to account, even though that's his own team. And you can imagine the situation whereby it starts looking a little bit like Viktor Orban's Hungary.
I'm obsessed with a book that was written in 1997.
Sovereign Individual.
Sovereign Individual. Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad, William Rees-Mogg, with Davidson.
John Davidson.
John Davidson. And yesterday or the day before, Elon Musk, in one of the many thousands of tweets that this
is so important
that he's put out in recent days, he was attacking the United Nations and essentially was saying that it's served its purpose, but actually the world now is so difficult and so complicated, you kind of need really, really clever people like us to sort of take this over. He was really making the argument for the sovereign individual. And I think that's what this has always been about. I felt Brexit was about that. I felt this was about taking away the rules, taking away the guardrails, taking away the limits on democracy, so that the rich guys could get richer, the powerful people get more powerful. And I still believe that. And honestly, if people read that book in the context of what's happening today, say what you like about William Rees-Mogg, but my God, he was a clever guy.
So it's basically a kind of libertarian anarchism. Isn't it? That's what they want.
Totally.
It's actually the odd thing is people talk about it as conservatism, but it's the opposite of conservatives.
Absolutely.
Conservatives believe in institutions, traditions.
Yeah.
These guys, Musk and co, they want to burn all that because they think, as Rory said, they think it's wet. They think it's
This is a super important point, by the way. So the new Trump administration has at its helm Donald Trump, obviously, but actually there's some steering of Donald Trump, I would say, by Elon Musk. Peter Thiel financed JD Vance through to his senatorship, and he is Peter Thiel's protege. He had him at his hedge fund, I think, company where he was able to, I guess, mold JD Vance into what he wanted. So you've got JD Vance, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, David Sachs, 3 South African tech moguls who believe in something called technofascism. So technofascism is the idea that the people shouldn't have the vote. And this is what Elon Musk was literally saying the other day. That's the reference that Dominic there is talking about. He was saying this the other day on Twitter, that actually, burn down democracy. We are the ones that need to be defining the outcomes of a nation, because we are the knowledgeable technological peeps. And that's technofascism, and that's what those 3 particularly advocate. And they are behind the scenes. And when you put that together with Project 2025 seeking to purge the civil service, when think about removing the guardrails, then things do start looking a little bit scary.
feet and boring and limiting and stagnant.
Who wrote the foreword to the new paperback of The Sovereign Individual? Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel.
Was it Peter Thiel?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Wow.
These guys, they believe in that stridently. It's sort of their Bible.
Yeah, and Project 25, that document, again, if people haven't read it yet, it is a long read and it's a tough read, but it's definitely worth reading.
And yet what so many of the people who voted for him are thinking is, please intervene, help me make my life better. So it's this real contradiction with that.
Exactly. They think that they're going to be saved from whatever it is, whether it's wokery or, I don't know, inflation, by getting these people. Like they think that Peter Thiel and David Sachs and Elon Musk really care about the nation, about the welfare of those people. They're advocating defunding the Department of Education. They're advocating a form of techno-fascism. They're advocating stripping out the guardrails and the checks and balances. They don't care. These people don't care about the people of America. And yet that's precisely why Trump has been voted in. He's one of us. Yay. No, he's not. He's an elite. He's a very kind of person you're otherwise against. You've swapped a political elite for an oligarchic corporate elite, which is worse. So a transactionalist who is merely interested in self-aggrandizing and lining his own pockets and in his quest for power. It's so frustrating. So yeah, anyway, so much more to say about it. I just think that these are genuinely dangerous times, and inviting in this kind of administration, I think is just really, really risky. There's just a couple more of these excerpts, and I hope you don't mind me sharing them with you, because I think they are really useful to think about and just see if we understand exactly, what this administration might entail, and what people have voted for, and is this what they would want?
Losing. Rory.
Yeah, so very quick explainer. The evening has actually gone much more quickly, for those of you that are just tuning in, than people expected. Many people thought, because of 2020, more mail votes coming in, that this could drag on for days. It didn't. A bit like 2016, we're in a situation in which basically the race was over by about 2:30 in the morning, our time, about half an hour ago. And it really finished at the point at which it became clear that Donald Trump had taken Pennsylvania. There was votes.
We'll just go through this bit a little bit.
States. He could end up in a position, all in a slightly cheery voice. I am profoundly shattered by the whole situation. And what we've been talking about over the last few hours is that this will have incredible impacts on Russia-Ukraine, where we're likely to see support taken away from Zelensky and Putin increase his position in Europe, we're likely to see huge consequences for American democracy, for the Supreme Court. Trump is a man who is threatening mass deportations, revenge against his enemies. It's been a profoundly unpleasant campaign. And the Democrats, who I felt had learned a lot of lessons from 2016, had turned a lot of things around, sadly, on the night, did not do enough to win.
How are you going to handle this?
I'm going to be a good sport. I congratulated him and Elon Musk on Twitter. I'm an American. I want the guy to succeed. If he's going in a direction that I think doesn't make sense for the country, I think I owe myself and my family to speak out about it. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to be this bitter guy. He won, we lost, and then we throw eggs and tomatoes at the television. He's got the mantle of the presidency again. Let's hope he succeeds. Let's hope people reach him and say, hey, these systems are in place for a reason. He told John Kelly, why do we have, the 20,000 troops at the DMZ? And when Kelly explained it to him, he backed off a little bit. We got to get people in place around him to get him to back off some of the really tough, nonsensical things. These systems that have been put in place over the last 80 years in America have helped make the world safer, more prosperous, and freer. And the stuff that he's talking about could potentially damage that system. Who's happy tonight? Vladimir Putin. That should tell you everything you need to know. Viktor Orban is happy. You think Keir Starmer's happy tonight? He's like thrilled that this happened?
That's such a good point. And someone said this earlier in the threads, is that, Putin is happy. And if Putin and Viktor Orban are happy about this electoral outcome, then it's probably not a great electoral outcome, certainly as far as the world is concerned. Now, again, there will be some people that might argue from a US point of view, yeah, but there weren't these wars with Trump, and now there are all these wars, and Trump will stop these wars. And then that's, again, just a really simplistic understanding of the geopolitics of the world and the history of the world over the last 20 years. It fundamentally misunderstands Trump as well, who had to be held back from nuking Iran. He's not some pacifist, Trump. He's just he's a transactionalist who will do whatever he wants in order to maintain his power and to look good kind of to himself and to the people that he thinks matters. So, yeah. I did really like what Rory Stewart said originally in the first clip I showed you, which is where did I go wrong? And it's having this hope for the US and just thinking that the US is going to make the right decision. And it's this. So the two elements, like I talked to you before, is one, where did everyone else go wrong? So why have you made the wrong decision? And that is, as far as I'm concerned, and I know you won't all agree with this, but it's the information thing. It's disinformation, misinformation, and lack of information. That is a problem, and it needs to be solved. And it needs to be solved in every country in the world. For every human being needs to have the requisite information so that they can either know that they are in an autocracy and somehow be empowered enough to do something about that. And knowledge brings them power. Or if they're in a functioning democracy, then you need to know enough to make an informed decision to the benefit of whomsoever you want to benefit in your decision. The decision to vote for Trump is a decision that benefits Trump. And this is where it goes back to what I was explaining before. It's this difference between narcissism and servant leader. I'm not a religious person, but in the Bible, Jesus was a servant king that got down and washed the feet of his disciples to say, this is what a leader should do. And the Wolves-Harris ticket was a servant leader ticket. And the Trump-Vance ticket is an autocratic, narcissistic ticket that has no interest. He even said to his electorate at a rally, I don't care about you. I just want your vote. He literally told people that. And yet there's this general idea that he's the guy that's going to sort them out. He doesn't care about the American people. He's literally told you that. He said that to Latino voters. I'm only here because of the credentials and getting your vote. He's like, you're saying the quiet part out loud, but people kind of forgive him for that. No, believe him for that. Understand what he's actually saying. He's dangerous. And because of his transactionalism, the fact that he's so transactional in his interactions with other people, but other entities, and he sees the US as him, and in a world of competitors, it's transactional and it's a zero-sum game. So if you do well, that's us doing badly. So we need to do well, and so that you do badly, and that means that we're winning this competition. It's not like that. It's not. It can be like that, but it's not always like that. We work with alliances so that there's a positive sum game, so that we do well together. The you and the EU, you and NATO. NATO is working for your benefit. It is not a drain on you, so that money that goes into NATO is just money that's not allowing you to become great. No, it is exactly that. NATO allowed money spent, and it's not spent into NATO, it's spent on your own defense. It doesn't even understand how NATO works. It's spent on your own defense, and you project power with that defense, and you work with security alliances to your benefit. So you're reaping trade deals as a reward and so on and so forth. That's an investment, and you get return on your investment, and you export security. It's like, that's a nuanced understanding of how the world works. But the idea that, oh, can't spend money on NATO, you're not actually spending it on a thing, mate. It's on your own defense as a percentage of GDP. We can't spend money on NATO because, you know, Europe needs to spend more, and they're not spending, you know. And it's this really simplistic understanding. And it's not to say there aren't nuances within that actually Europe does need to spend more on defense. There are elements of truths within that, but it's just a generally very simplistic way of understanding how the world works. I'm going to go to another point here. Now, this is not with that video, but I'm going to just show you two more excerpts. This is the Bulwark podcast that they were doing live and then after the election. And there's a couple of interesting points here.
Can I inject? I want to inject some skepticism about a couple of these things. And I don't dispute that the trans ad may have moved some votes. It's a very small issue. I know it's a cultural wedge issue. There's just such bigger stuff out there. I also think on the subject of women losing, I think if Joe Biden were at the top of this ticket, this would be a 5-point national rate. I mean, I think it would be, much worse. I'm a big fan of Occam's razor. Go for the simple explanations of things. This is a wrong track election. Nobody wins with these wrong track numbers. I give Kamala Harris a lot of credit for making it as close as it's been. I think she's been a good candidate. The simplest explanation is people were looking for the out person. On the subject of minorities, of Blacks, Latinos, the simplest explanation here is the same cultural issues work there that work for white people. There's an illusion among a lot of white liberals that people of color are just somehow magical and different and all that. And what we're seeing is they're breaking in a lot of the same ways, voting on a lot of the same issues, the same economic concerns as like working class white people. JVL, here's where I would disagree with you. I don't think America wants this. I think what Trump has done on the campaign trail in the last couple of weeks has hurt him. I don't think people like this stuff. They're not voting for it. They're just not caring. I just think the opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. And people are just indifferent about a lot of things that we care about and that we should help other people care about. A lot of our concerns here at the Bulwark about institutionalism, institutions, the Constitution, constitutional democracy, the rule of law. This is stuff that just most people don't vote on, and our job is to sort of get people to vote on it. But
this is a massively important point, and this actually goes back to what Dominic, the historian from the Rest is History, that was invited onto that panel with the Rest is Politics, the guy on the end, the English guy on the left-hand side. He was talking about this isn't conservatism. And what's really interesting is you get someone like Viktor Orban to the Conservative Conference, the CPAC, as if he's conservative, and he's not. He's a right-wing populist, and there's a big difference between right-wing populism and old-school conservatism. Old-school conservatism is the rule of law. It is the checks and balances of traditional institutions that keep you in place, that conserve things roughly as they are, not kind of populist change things, wreck it, a wrecking ball, and move to autocracy. That's not conservatism. And so when you say when you see people that say, yeah, I'm a conservative, I'm voting for Donald Trump because I'm a conservative, I would say that's incorrect. People at the Bulwark, these are conservatives. That's what they started up the Bulwark as a conservative pushback against right-wing populism. This is classical conservatism. And I think there's a meaningful difference that people don't understand. And if you believe in the rule of law and these institutions and the civil service that keeps you in check, the Constitution, when you've got someone that's flagrantly disregarding the Constitution, it's hard to call them a conservative. And that's what Trump has clearly done over time.
It's relatively normal for people to focus on what's in front of them and not on this stuff. And it isn't because they like fascism. It's just because they are not registering it or don't care enough about the authoritarian measures that Donald Trump has already taken.
But I mean, I'm much closer to JPL on this, but it's a much longer conversation. Obviously, you can have precise things that alienate voters, and then there's a horrible alternative which they go for. One of the reasons they go for it is that they were alienated because of Latinx or something. On the other hand, they still shouldn't go for the alternative, and they shouldn't vote on that ad. And Kamala Harris ran a pretty good campaign, and she walked pretty far away from the left. You didn't hear a lot of Latinx. Oh, maybe they're paying a price for doing it 8 years ago. Fine. If people are willing to punish the Democrats for 8 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, being too woke by electing a guy who ran on deporting 15 million people, on destroying the civil service, on bigotry and everything else, that's not a good situation. We should.
Such an important point. So the idea that the left is too woke and the Democrats are too woke, when they had like Liz Cheney going around with them, and then they went clearly to the center. But Trump and his team managed to do that really well. So one of the reasons they managed to break that ceiling is because independents didn't break so heavily for them, or not at all really. And there wasn't this huge movement of Republicans against Trump towards Harris, Republicans for Harris. And people kind of went back to their original kind of voting behaviors, and the kind of culture war things did have purchase, but unnecessarily so, or like unwarranted. They were unwarranted in their purchase because the Democrats had kind of left all that behind. It was a real centrist policy platform they were on in terms of, you know, what they were talking about with regard to the economy, house building, stuff like that, you know, things that were genuinely going to help people. And having on board people like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, these aren't woke liberals. But of course, that broke through. And this is what I talk about. The difference between perception and reality is so stark here. And the other thing that is like, I hate, and I have mates that do this. I've got a mate who is massively into Elon Musk. And he sent Elon Musk a tweet today saying, congratulations. And I was like, mate, you can't do that. You can't say that. He's an absolute dick, Elon Musk. And he's like, yeah, he's going to get this job in the administration for more efficiency. It's like, you think Elon Musk in the government is a good thing? Like how, like, and you are really clever and you are really knowledgeable. And we used to have all the same views on stuff. And now how have you got to, but once he's got sucked into the Elon Musk is great through kind of Tesla and all this stuff originally, that he was one of these Elon Musk fans. And then he becomes that kind of cult leader and gets sucked into the whole rest of the ecosystem to the point where, like, now he appears to be a bit of a Trump supporter. And you like, from me, from someone who's not American, like my friend, like seeing him go down that route through Jordan Peterson and these sort of people into that. I've talked about this before, and I've got so many friends that have gone down that kind of incremental rabbit hole to like, oh yeah, bit of grievance narrative. Yeah. And then before you know it, he's an absolute Trump acolyte and can't see any criticisms against him. And then you're in that whole world, and then you're cheering on Musk. But this idea that you're like, oh, I hate woke, so therefore let's deport 13 million people, or I hate woke, so let's destroy the Constitution, or I hate woke, so let's do this. It's this jump into the alternative. It's like, because I don't like this, which is really insignificant, like transgender toilets. Really? Like, you really worried about that? Like that ruins your daily business. Like, how much does that affect your life? And then like, oh no, but all of this stuff that really will affect your life, like 2000% tariffs on everything, you just jumped into that because transgender toilets. Freaking get a grip. But this is the importance of culture wars, and the Republicans have known this for years. The war on Christmas, it started decades ago. War on Christmas and the Fox News jumping on the culture war stuff, because it then belies the idea that they're actually policy short, they're policy weak, they're policy thin. So we don't really have much to say about what we're going to do other than tax cuts for the rich. But actually, that's quite a difficult one to sell. So we'll just do, these guys want to take your guns and kill your babies, and you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. Oh my God, let's get, and that's turned into transgender toilets. That's the latest iteration of that. And it's just like, while we can have really like in-depth conversations about what trans means and whether we should be in, etc., it's like, if you put that at the top of your list of concerns of what you're going to vote, who you're going to vote for over that, then I just think you're being manipulated by these bad faith actors.
Shouldn't blink about it. We shouldn't kid ourselves about it. He's going to get more votes tonight than he got 4 years ago or 8 years ago. He's going to win a bigger victory in the popular vote. The only victory he will have won in the popular vote. He could get to 50% of the popular vote. He ran a horrible campaign. The mask was off. We all saw it at Madison Square Garden. Harris spent a lot of time with us and people we know. Maybe she shouldn't have done what she did in 2019, but at the end of the day, the idea that, anyways, I'm not saying those things didn't contribute as an analytical matter. Of course they do. Just like hyperinflation helped elect, Hitler and all this, but the willingness to go for Trump, people need to really think hard about that after everything we've seen. Not just to go for him. I don't agree. Not just accepting him or indifferent to him. He's getting more votes than he got. And they're not just rural people who are being turned out. Look at the results in New Jersey and other places that are not full of, rural, hillbillies who don't know anything. He's winning. He's doing better in the suburbs. He's doing better with blacks. He's doing better with Hispanics. It's a pretty strong showing for Trump. I'm very worried that they won't hold the Democrats won't hold the House. He'll have 3 branches of government. And then, incidentally, we can have all the discussions we want about, we have to deal with these cultural issues. I'm all for that, obviously. Simone, we've all spent a lot of time talking about this over the decades. But he's going to be doing things in 3 months that we're going to have to oppose. And we're going to have to figure out how to oppose. And we're going to have to have a big coalition to oppose. And so the idea that meanwhile, we're going to sort of get half the Democratic Party to rethink things, that's pretty challenging when we're trying to organize to work with Democratic governors, I guess, to stop 15 million people from being rounded up. I mean, the severity of the challenge, I think, is great. It's really a catastrophe, I'm afraid, for now, at least.
And so, yeah.
I think that's a really cogent response there. And the idea that actually, as I mentioned earlier, that if there's a trifecta, how do you put the things in place to build up an opposition to what the Republicans could well do, which is just, bulldoze over the existing infrastructure. If you're taking Project 2025 seriously, then you're going to see a purge of government officials, and you'll get lackeys in. You'll get an absolute you will get a movement towards Christian nationalism. Now, you might be a Christian and think that's great, but do you know what? Not everyone in the country is, and there are different types of Christians, and not all of those Christians want a theocracy. Actually, a functioning constitutional democracy would be good. Thank you very much. But that's what you're moving towards. Just listen to the words of J.D. Vance. Just listen to the words of the people who he's putting into his administration, who were authors of Project 2025. This is very, very concerning. And then finally, there's one more bit on this, and then I'll just give my closing remarks, because I'm sure you've all got things to do. I'll look at a couple of questions and whatnot that you may or may not have. Let's bring that back up, because I keep forgetting to do that. And then we go 409:53. Okay, so
Sam, I've been listening to this, and I share all these sentiments, and I don't disagree with any of the analysis, and I'm perfectly willing to say Trump's going to win tonight, and it'll be sweeping. He'll have a Senate under Republican control. My mind's kind of shifted in the past 20 to 30 minutes in a weird way. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying I'm energized by it, but I do feel mission called to it. Like, I remember where I was in 2016 when I had the same pit in my stomach, and I felt very much impassioned by the idea that places like this really do actually now have a hypercritical and important role. And we were all talking about, well, what does the resistance look like? It looks like this. It's small, punchy opposition, and it's impact journalism. It's giving voice to the voiceless. It's holding people account. It's not holding punches. And like, look, obviously everyone at the Bulwark didn't want this to happen. I don't think anyone's like, gonna spin this as like a positive. But I do think one of the ways that we have to conceive of this type of night is that it doesn't disqualify our work. It makes it more important than ever. And I think that, to me, is where my head's at right now. Like, I'm thinking, well, what does this mean for the future of the Democratic Party? What does this mean for the future of the Fourth Estate? What does this mean for actual, serious Republican people who want to have independence? Like, how do you hold them accountable? What does that look like? What does modern journalism in the second Trump administration look like? Things like that. And, my mind's racing with possibilities in that sense. And maybe that makes me crazy and opportunistic. But I mean, fuck it. Like, no, I feel like I gotta go.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. I'm not going anywhere. I'm fucking not leaving. I'm not going to fucking Punta del Este or this is not. That's not happening.
Nice though.
It does sound nice. I have a little bit a bleaker view of the same point, which is.
Well, let me just say, I feel like there's people in this chat, and I'm reading the chats, and like half of the comments are some version of fuck it. Like, politics doesn't work. I'm quitting it. Like, it's hopeless. Like, I'm done with it. Michael Wiggins just now. I'm done with politics. And like, if you're gonna check out, like, come on. Now's not the time to check out. Now's the time to check in for me. Like, I really feel that firmly. Like, this is not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. But if you're not willing to actually like do the reporting, do the work, protect people who don't deserve to be targeted by our government from, protect them and help them, then you know what? You shouldn't have been in this in the first place. That's where my head's at.
I want to speak to there, though, frustration, because this is what I think. I think that people, and during our whole lives, and even though Bill's Methuselah, even during Bill's whole life, like, there's been a trajectory of this country that has been towards how can we make things incrementally better? Like, there's a little step back at times, but like, how can slowly but surely we make things incrementally better? I think the reality of the next 4 years at minimum, maybe probably more, is it's like, how can we protect as much territory as possible? Like, how can we prevent?
That's a really, really salient point, this. So traditionally, as far as Tim Miller's concerned, it's been about making the world, or making the country of the US incrementally better. With each election cycle, you're adding and making it better and making it better. And he's saying right now we're on a defensive. So it's how do we stop it getting worse? And at the moment, we are fighting against this wanting to go back. Kamala Harris is talking about we won't go back. Well, actually, he does want to take the country back in time to another era, strip away some of these checks and balances. How do you stop that happening? And then the question is, well, if you don't have any form of effective governance, if you lose the House and the Senate and the presidency, then you're shit out of luck.
Retrenchment across whatever it is, reproductive rights, rule of law. We could a role in the world. We could name thing after thing. Like, there are a million things, but like, and I can understand why that's dispiriting for people. And like, this is actually part of the reason why I am not taking drugs like I was 8 years ago, is because despite the fact that I did think Kamala was going to win, I knew that there's a legitimate chance of this. We've talked about it a lot. And so
we've talked about it a lot. I would just like to say, like, the idea that like we were all hopped up on hopium about Kamala is not true. We have been very clear-eyed about the possibility, like the very legitimate possibility that Donald Trump run. JBL's written about 100 triads about the fact that he might. We have been coin flipped the whole time.
Yeah.
So
and that, yeah, and I'm guilty of thinking that she had. So my range of what was going to happen last night was a very tight Trump win to a quite comfortable Kamala Harris win, and I thought she'd eke out an okay win based on the three, really, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I thought, judging by polling, that they had that in the bag. But of course, polling has a margin of error, and that's still just about sat within the margin of error. It depends kind of which pollsters you're looking at. But I think the pollsters broadly got it somewhat correct, i.e. it was really bloody close. But if you take the margin of error that way, then Trump wins all of the battleground states. And actually, the polls essentially predicted, realistically, the polls predicted the ability last night of Trump to win every single battleground state, and Kamala Harris to win every battleground state. And that's a huge difference. So actually, that's quite a sizable change of outcomes there, difference of outcomes. So yeah, was I sucked in by hopium? Well, actually no, because I was looking at loads of data points, but I was always questioning, and I did say this to you, which is, do these lackluster rallies and crap speeches and people not turning up to these rallies, will that convert to votes? And I very often asked, are people finding out about this? Because from the DNC, and this is why I go back to one of the main reasons Kamala Harris lost was the information spaces. When you have the DNC, the 4-day conference, or whatever you want to call it, where you had 7 Republican speakers speaking on behalf of, like, not endorsing Trump and endorsing Harris by walking across the aisle, when Fox News doesn't show a single one of those Republican speakers, when Fox News never shows anything particularly critical about Donald Trump, then if that's where you get the entirety of your information, and that's the most, by a country mile, the most popular news station, TV station, then you are going to be in a place where you are not cognizant of Trump's shortfalls and the things people have said about him, and people from within his own inner working in a group, his own in-group. You know, you had people, again, to go back to the door knocking thing, you had people door knocking that were coming up to Trump voters. Trump voters will open a door and they say, would you realize what Mark Milley and John Kelly have said, that he's a fascist? And I'm like, no, I don't have a clue. So, well, everyone's been talking about that for the last 2 weeks. Everyone's been talking about how Trump's a no, this person has no idea, because if it's not reported on Fox News in a way that is fair and balanced, then actually they're not really going to know about it, or they just don't watch the news at all. People tune into the news in the last couple of days of the election, if they do at all, or they get it entirely from TikTok. And if you're in that algorithmic rabbit hole, then you're not going to be hearing these things. And that comes back to understanding that people made the wrong decision based on a lack of knowledge or disinformation. And then when you hear that Russia have been involved with loads of videos and the bomb threats yesterday on predominantly high black voting, high numbers of, intensely black voting areas, those were the poll stations that were targeted, then that adds an extra layer. Now, I'm not saying that would at all have made a difference, not at all, to the election, but it doesn't help. And when you get one party not even acknowledging that the Russians are interfering with the democratic outcome of the country, and not saying they'd do anything about it, then I think you've got issues there. So they kind of welcome the interference, of course, because it helps their side. And now old Poots is laughing in the Kremlin. all his Christmases have come at once. So yeah, I got it wrong, but I don't think I was doing it out of pure hopium. I would have been looking at certain data points within my own information space, but they were data points. They were literally like issues with the rallies, and the stuff Trump was saying was bonkers. But again, we hear about that. If you're not hearing the bonkers stuff he says, then you're more likely to vote for him. It's that simple. And I think I underappreciated, even though I talked about it often, I underappreciated the power of the lack of knowledge about A, who Trump is, and B, what he said, and C, what he's going to do. And people build up a notion of who Trump is and who the GOP are, and then go with that. They create their Trump in their heads, and I'm voting for that guy. Yeah, but have you heard what he said about this? No. Or I have, but I've twisted that to be acceptable. And it's this knowledge argument that I think I think it's important. Right, I'm going to go to some questions and points. I'm on my own here, so I can't tell. There's probably been loads of really amazing questions and comments, but I've missed them all. Thank you very much to Mr. Polska, or Polskaya. Hello, team, and JP, F Russia, and Trump. Have a nice day. Thank you very much for that. Kevin Force, thank you for your kindness, Kevin. Always a great supporter of the channel. Right, we have Raven89F saying, Jonathan, like I said a few times, this election was a carbon copy of the Polish election in 2020. What do you do when evil wins? Try again. So this then speaks to the importance of not allowing the autocratic style of government to take away the checks and balances. So Poland just about got away with it. So the PIS did some things that were democratic backsliding, but they weren't as bad as the things that have taken place, say, in Viktor Orban's Hungary and in Georgia. So you look at Georgia now and you're thinking, I don't know if they can reverse that. And I'm looking at Hungary and thinking they can probably reverse that, because actually there is this guy that's getting more and more popular. But Orban has put an awful lot of stuff in place. And I don't know that if the next election comes along, whether you would see a free and fair election. And this is what I worry about, is that you start chipping away at the ability. Most governments will try and do this. In America, the common one is gerrymandering. So you change your state district lines in order to make sure that if we've got all of this type of people, they're going to be over there in that district, and then we can contain them over there. And then it means that actually we're more likely to win this state, or voting for this particular district or whatever. Gerrymandering is a huge issue. Red district, and there's all sorts of things that can take place in the US already that allow one side to maintain power more likely than another, and I think those are problematic. What you try again, as long as you are able to try again. And I just think there are some countries where that is becoming more and more problematic. I mean, Georgia, almost certainly Georgian Dream didn't win that election, and they've stolen it. Now, will America ever get like that? Well, you'd hope not. But then you've got a Supreme Court that's looking more and more stacked, and you've got a potential Project 2025 administration that would make it harder for an opposition government to get back in control. Right, Peter van der Voorde says, do you think the American shit show will make GB and EU rethink Brexit and return to as was, this being in both best interests? So that's a really big question. I know that Keir Starmer and the Labour government want a closer relationship with Europe, primarily for the economic reasons. So we are struggling outside of the EU, and I know that some people might disagree with that because Brexit was the apple of their eyes or whatever. But according to all decent data, we have economically hurt from coming out of the EU. And the main objective, the main mechanism with which the present Labour government in the UK can generate money is through economic growth. And therefore, being out of the EU and economic growth is challenging. So that's why Keir Starmer is looking at doing getting closer with Europe, both from a security point of view. I think that's really important. maybe you might see joining the customs union, the single market at some point in the EU, but there are things that need to take place. Now, what's going to be interesting is what the EU's response to the US elections with regard to Ukraine, and whether you will start seeing an emboldening. My bet is that Orban, who was absolutely depending on Trump winning and was saying, we're not going to put any funding in place for Ukraine until after the elections because we want to see who wins. You know that Viktor Orban will now be working double hard to undermine any European support for Ukraine. That is thanks to a Donald Trump victory. Had Kamala Harris got in, lots of pressure would have been put on Hungary. Hungary wouldn't have had a friend in the White House. That hasn't happened. So that's the sort of ramification of this election that I think is deeply troubling. Now, interesting point here. The Kuzman says, Trump does not have the power to dissolve NATO, Jonathan. Yes, the Senate put in a rule because they were expecting this. So luckily, and was it Marco Rubio that did this? Actually put in a rule to stop this from happening. And the idea is that Trump's way of getting out of NATO won't be to kind of formally pull out of NATO, but to stop funding exercises and a closer relationship with NATO and saying it's all a waste of money. No, we're in NATO, but we're not really in NATO. And there are some theories that that's the kind of approach he will take. Issa Draco says, you're right, Mr. Lyon, speaking to someone else. The economy is good on paper, but for the average person, the cost of living is through the roof. Inflation going back to 3% from 8% or whatever it was doesn't lower prices. Well, actually, no. I disagree with this, and this is a problem position. So you will never get deflation where prices go down, apart from like, what is it, the Great Depression or whenever. Prices don't go down. And this is the problem is people are expecting prices to go back down. They won't go down. No one's going to reduce their prices across the board. Inflation is about controlling how much it goes up and keeping it at a manageable level. And what you want is wages to rise. And wages have been rising above inflation, average wages for something like 16 months now. The problem here is the difference between perception and reality. And I showed you a video some time back where you had some economists and pollsters, the economic pollsters and whatnot, looking at this issue of the difference between perception and fundamentals. And the problem was COVID has skewed people's idea of how much things cost. COVID screwed around with economic perceptions, and then coming out of COVID and the inflation that took place as a result of COVID, it takes a long time to sort out. And the theory is that actually, had you had another 6 months or a year, the perceptions would have aligned more. It's getting there. You've got inflation at a really manageable level. You've got the US economy working at the best it's ever worked. You know, people are in jobs. You've got record low unemployment. You've got stock markets going through the roof. You've got this, you've got that. It's all looking pretty good. The only difference is perception. And the problem is perception isn't necessarily reality. It's not necessarily the truth. So that people feel things are expensive doesn't mean that they are expensive compared to the wages they're getting in. But we keep things in our minds that like, oh, butter should cost this much, and if it costs this much, then why have I got so not enough money at the end of the month? But actually, we're spending on how many streaming services do we get now that we didn't have to get as TVs become more fragmented and more expensive? You know, these other things that are luxuries that we see as necessities, and you're like, oh, I don't have any money anymore. But actually, we're spending, you know, way less on food than we used to, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, when you look at the data, it doesn't actually, I think, particularly support this idea. But the Republicans knew that perception is more important than reality. So if you sell people the idea that inflation's terrible, and it was bad, right? But but people's memories always lag behind the movements, or people's perceptions lag behind the movements. And as I said, this video was going through why there is this lead time and why it's slightly longer, and it's slightly longer due to COVID and blah, blah, blah. We can explain all of this. There's data to explain all of this, but people don't, you know, people have the idea that inflation is really bad, and that's very difficult to dislodge. And the Republicans were able to capitalize on that big time. And I don't know that the Democrats did enough about that, enough like fact checking on that and putting people right. I'd never heard it. And I think they should have taken that head on and said what they occasionally said was that, yeah, inflation is bad and we need to do more about that. I think they needed to do some of that messaging, but also, by the way, actually, wages are looking a lot better than they were, and but you don't want to tell people. The problem is it's quite delicate because you don't want to tell people they're not feeling things are expensive, because that doesn't go down well. So it's really, really delicate one, that. Anna Downs says, let's not be kidding ourselves. The Trump ideology is totalitarianism. I think it is a movement towards that, definitely. Jonathan, the South African takeover is concerning. I absolutely think Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and David Sachs are three really highly problematic people. And anyone who's in their cult needs to just take a deep breath and look at what they are espousing and supporting. RA, that girl Chicago, says, as a black woman, a contractor and a veteran with sons in the military, this just hurts. I mean, yeah, goodness, I can only imagine it. It's this idea of like, do you think these guys are going to be on your side? So what Trump did for concerning the veterans, I think, when he was and the funding, the VA and Veterans Association, whatnot, it's like, you look at his track record. So here's a really important point, right? As I said in my opening screed, Trump had the lowest of the low approval ratings when he left office. When he left office, people were like, you were shit, mate. You are not very good at running a country. And then 4 years later, people's perceptions are 20% higher than when he was actually in office. So the idea of Trump with rose-tinted glasses in retrospect is a much more attractive ideal than the real Trump. You're probably going to get this to this stage where 2 years into his, I hope you get to this stage of 2 years into his administration, people are like, oh yeah, I remember what it was like. Yeah, it was really crap. And he's actually not, and he just did tax cuts for the rich. And actually that wasn't great. And again, to go back to my initial screed, is that, and Barack Obama was talking about this in his rallies, where he's saying, Trump talks about how good the economy was, and people remember Trump's economy. But that was 8 years of Obama putting the things in place so that Trump took over an absolutely fantastically functioning economy. And you've got Trump doing this again. He's a freaking lucky bastard, Trump, where he's like, takes over an amazing economy and goes, look what I've done. I'm the most amazing president. I can do economics. Yeah, I know what tariffs mean. Tariffs. What are tariffs? And he's taken over an economy that is functioning the best out of the G7 economies. And he's going to, like 6 months' time, people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I feel better about how much the price of butter is now. Because yeah, you're doing really well because of the stuff that Biden put in place with the Chips and Science Act, the infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act and whatnot. It's like, that's the stuff that was put in place that 2 years later is coming to fruition now. So Biden, but the problem for Harris is she had to both differentiate herself from Joe Biden and also claim the good stuff. And that's an impossible thing to do. People were wanting her to go, are you Joe Biden? No, I'm not Joe Biden. No, I'm not Joe Biden. But actually, those things that we were doing, they were really good. And we need to continue doing them. But I'm not Joe Biden. And that's an impossible sales task. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on one. Just a couple more. Johnny Christensen, thank you. After a republic comes an empire, look at Rome. Puerto Rico is a colony. We're not allowed to vote. I think that's an absolute travesty. Thanks, John Panciotti. Thank that actor George Clooney for his interference. No. So this is, okay, Mr. Scribble, I'm going to disagree. People are going to be blaming Kamala Harris for this. As one of the people earlier said, had you had Biden in here, he still would have got tonked, right? Biden would have been spanked as well. Biden was super low approval rating. I think unfairly so, by the way. I think that's a perception reality issue, like I've said before. And Fox News doing an absolutely fantastic job, as they always do, on character assassinating and administration assassinating anything to do with the Democrats. So people had a negative view on Biden, but George Clooney did what had to be done. The problem was Biden didn't put it in place earlier. What should have happened is a year ago, 2 years ago, Biden said, yeah, I'm getting a bit old now. I don't think I'm going to run in 2 years' time. And you start putting things in place. So there are some people who are criticizing Harris for not going through a primaries process. I am not critical of that at all. That is absolutely right. She should not have gone through a primary process because she had 105 days to get that thing up and running. And if you had 30 days of 100, if you had dedicated a third of the time to a primary, then you've got only 2 months for whoever wins that primary to create their entire platform. You can't do it, not in American politics. Maybe in British politics, not in American politics. But on the other hand, so 105 days was not optimal. She had to build a plane while flying it. What she needed happen was, or what the Democrats needed to happen was 2 years previously, Biden goes, yeah, I'm not going to run again. I'm going to be like 107. So you guys go for it. Good luck. And I'll endorse whoever wins a primary. And then you go through a proper primary stage where then the nation gets to know about all these different characters and you get voting on it and then you get buy-in. And then at the end of that process, you get someone that is more robustly brought into that position. I think George Clooney did exactly what he needed to do in writing that op-ed. And then Biden eventually saying, yeah, okay, I'll stand back. There are claims that Biden is angry and has been angry for some time and feels that he pushed out, but he would have got absolutely spanked in this election. Kevin Force, the difference between talking about patriotism in the live chat, the difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. Good or bad, they're like, yeah, no, actually, a patriot should be able to say, yeah, I really support my country, but actually here, we need to do better than that. And I'm saying that as a patriot, which is interesting because there's a, this was it. Kevin Force then says, patriot, the person who can holler the loudest without knowing what he's hollering about. That's a Mark Twain quote. Anyway, I just thought that's pretty good. Is it correct that Kamala is said to have polled worse than Biden, or is that just in county? She did worse than Biden across virtually every county, from every state, from New Jersey to Wisconsin, and in every demographic. It was really surprising. But I don't think that it's because, so I disagree with this. How about a simple theory? The US isn't ready for a female president. I don't think that's the case. I think they're ready for a female president. I think if you had a female president who was Republican, if Liz Cheney, in a different universe, if Liz Cheney had run for office, the Republicans would have loved to have had a conservative Republican female president before the liberal lefties, right? I don't think it's that. And even if it is that, that is an information problem. That is a propaganda problem. That is, you know, maybe institutional misogyny throughout the media spheres like Fox News or whatever. So I think they were ready. I think there's nothing in the way of her becoming president had all the right things been in place and had the electorate been more knowledgeable about all the things concerned. And that includes her. Like, I don't think that they knew her enough, actually. There wasn't enough time selling her. I think she needed to do another debate with Trump. I think Trump's team were brilliant in not putting him through to another debate. Very clever. I think she should have done Joe Rogan before the other guys did Joe Rogan when it was being touted. In the end, she wanted Joe Rogan to come to her up in Wisconsin or somewhere, and he refused. But now he's blaming her for choking or whatever. She actually did want to do one, but anyway, make of that what you will. And finally, thank you to Nighthawk here, who says Atlas Intel were the real winners. They nailed it. Well, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the Atlas Intel stats. Atlas Intel. I was listening to Dave Trotter talk about pollsters. So Atlas Intel, some people think they're really accurate, but they might well be accurate by fluke and then people just think they're really good, because actually I've seen some eviscerations of Atlas Intel and the way they do their polling, which is like really bad. Dave Trotter did a video on Atlas Intel, the worst poll ever. And he just looks at the crosstabs, looks at how they did their polling, and like, this is just really bad polling. But really bad pollsters can still get it right, because it's not necessary. Well, it's not dependent. You can just fluke it and get it right, and then people think, oh, you're amazing. Atlas Intel, I don't think they've got a huge provenance going back a long time. I think they're a Brazilian outfit, etc., etc. I mean, what's interesting is that Ann Seltzer is getting an absolute pasting for actually being an outlier. But the question then is, well, how did she get it? She's just giving you the answers of what people in a survey answer, right? So you can slag her off for that. The much better question is, okay, how did it happen that you've asked 808 people and those results weren't representative of what people thought? It's much more useful to go into understanding why polls are not accurate in any given time. And Jaden Alvarado says, can the results change from a recount? I don't know what the latest is. I haven't looked, obviously, for a couple of hours. Are there going to be recounts? I doubt it. I don't know if there are late ballots that are going to come in from absentee or anything like that. I presume by now it's all pretty much over in the swing states. I mean, the issue is that she lost across all counties and all demographics in ways that wasn't expected. And the question is going to be why. I don't think there are necessarily answers to this yet. People are going to be questioning exactly why that took place, why there was this underperformance. That people like myself were then going, well, I think she's got this. It's not going to be a whitewash, but I think I was thinking she was going to be not super comfortable, but just eking out those blue wall states and North Carolina and Georgia, and it just didn't come in. So I think part of it's going to be Democratic turnout as well. Like, did they get Trump did a better job of getting his voters out than the Democrats, and then there were independents not skewing Democrat, but seeming to skew, and black voters as well, and Latino voters becoming more kind of like your regular voters. What some people are saying are a realignment of these demographic groups. That's young people, that's different ethnicities, that's different age group. I said age, that's education, that's so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot. Oh, I forgot to say this. So when I talked about all the different media entities that are responsible for disinformation, misinformation, and a lack of information, I talked about Fox News. I talked about Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and Twitter and all these kind of information spaces. I meant to say, and I'll add this into my Facebook screed, I meant to say Sinclair and Talk Radio, and Sinclair owns like most of the local TV channels, even if it's like Fox 18 or something. You think it's a local Fox channel, or CBS this, you think it's a local CBS channel. Actually, it's owned by Sinclair, and they have a set script that they have, which is basically GOP propaganda. So you have talk radio that's really prevalent throughout the United States, that is almost entirely Republican based, and you have local TV that is almost entirely Republican or massively skews Republican in a very scripted, overtly propagandistic way. John Oliver's done a couple of videos on Sinclair that I suggest you go and check out. And then you've got obviously Fox and all those other ones. And I think that the mechanics of messaging far favor the Republicans, and that is an issue that Democrats are going to have to deal with. And I did a video on this some time back where I looked at an article which is, it was I think it's George Soros is buying up a load of radio stations to fight back. And this is what I was saying earlier, that Democrats need to play not dirty, but just as strong as the Republicans are. Like, the Republicans own most of these mechanisms of messaging. Well, the Democrats need to own some of those so that they can put their own narrative across to the general public in a way that Republicans are. There's a massive asymmetry there that needs to be sorted out. If the Democrats want to get back in, they need to take control over modes of messaging online and in the local TV and radio spaces. They absolutely need to. But there you go. Brian O, by the way, hi Brian, long time no speak. Seltzer got an accurate representation from their targets. The problem was they polled a left-leaning population. It was clear in their spreadsheets. Yeah, I to be honest, I don't know enough yet. I would need to look into that, but it could. And then that might not be a selection bias, intentional. It could just be how it turned out. So you are going to get anomalous polls as well. That they're called outliers because sometimes you just poll the people that you select just so happen to be a bunch of people who believe more this way than that way. So you're always going to get outliers, and she's had pretty good polls up to date. That could just be a statistical anomaly, or it could be problematic methodology that she's badly selected her subjects. Gunter Sternig, thank you very much for your super chat. I really appreciate that, mate. Thank you. Anyway, that's probably enough from me. You've heard me bang on enough. I need to think about doing. I haven't had the wherewithal to generate my Ukraine information yet, and I might have to take a day off doing that, which is a shame because I've done it every day. But yes, so there you go. Those are my thoughts on the election. I am really, really worried going forward because had this been John McCain, I wouldn't really have given a toss. Like it would have been John McCain, particularly, would have been amazing on Ukraine, right? A classical sort of Reagan Republican. Yeah, you're going to try and put in some abortion regulation. You're going to try a bit of this, try a bit of that. It's a bit swings and roundabouts. You eventually, you go one way, you go the other. This isn't that. Trump is not a run-of-the-mill conservative Republican. Trump is in my opinion, far-right populist. And the people he's got around him are far-right populists. Stephen Miller is an offensive human being. Steve Bannon is all sorts of wrong. J.D. Vance is a wolf in eyeliner. You've got the authors of you got Vought and Homan, what's his name? The authors basically of Project 2025 that he's surrounding himself with, whilst also saying, I've got nothing to do with Project 2025. Oh, am I in power? Where's that Project 2025? Oh, there it is. Right. Anyway, right. Points 1 to 1,000,000. Yeah, we're going to do them tomorrow. So I am scared. I'm scared for the US. I am petrified for Ukraine. If nothing else, think of those poor soldiers who are looking at the news in their trenches, hoping that the right person would be put in charge for them. Now, it may be that he can be convinced otherwise, but he's surrounding himself with people who are Putin appeasers. All those people I just mentioned, J.D. Vance, he says, I don't care about Ukraine. Literally, that's what he said. I am so scared for Ukraine. For me, this is where it gets emotional, and I get a little bit angry as well because of the unfairness of the universe. The universe doesn't give a shit about what we do, right? There are black holes flying around that could eat us up the click of the fingers. We have our own problems to deal with, and we need to deal with those problems ourselves. And Russia is one of our problems. And we need to work really, really hard. And unfortunately, there's just been an election that is almost certainly going to screw over Ukraine. And it is a real shame. Hi, James from whyukraine.com. The Democrats chose not to divide the Republicans on Ukraine. They could have come out full-throated in their support for Ukraine as a fight against Russia, and thus divided Republican electorate. yeah, I don't know if you're saying that's a good thing. Actually, they chose not to do that, and as a result, they kind of left it alone. So that leaves permission for the Republicans to kind of do a volte-face, do a bit of a 180 shift on Ukraine, from a MAGA Republican point of view. That is, I don't know. Interesting. That's certainly something to think about. Oh my goodness. And why in Ukraine? I joined the Ukrainian army next week. I got my official approval yesterday. That's amazing, mate. I hope you don't get injured this time. Please, good luck with that. Let us know how you get on. So yeah, this is kind of how I feel, George. George Flaxman, today is for feeling sorry for myself. Tomorrow I can be strong. That's why I showed you the stuff from the Bulwark, because that's kind of talking about, right, we have a duty. Like, they're talking about that as a bulwark, as a conservative bulwark against this creeping populism. I see myself to some degree. Like, I have my own political and moral opinions, and what I think should be good and right for the world, and I will be trying to hold to account. And you know, hopefully, I'm honest enough that if Trump does really good stuff, and the US does really good stuff, I'll be like, yeah, that's awesome. More of that. Thank you very much. But I am going to be reporting on the US going forward with a very, very critical eye concerning things like Ukraine. And I hope to goodness that that gets sorted for Ukraine's benefit, but I just don't believe it will. So Brian Ivy, Slava Ukraini, Herem Slava, for sure. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for putting up with me for my US videos, because I feel like I've let you down. I was saying all of these things and it broadly didn't come to pass. It just didn't happen. It was broadly within the range of what I said was going to happen. But I said it probably wasn't going to happen, and it did happen. But all of those points I was making concerning the stuff he was saying, that was all correct. My issue is that, given that that's all correct, given that my analysis was all correct, I think, about the content of all of these rallies and speeches and all these data points, how is it that he still got the vote? What has happened there? That's what needs explaining. And hopefully I've gone some way to do that. Take care, everybody, and I will try and get some videos out concerning Ukraine forthwith. All the best.